Welcome back to LexTalks Legal Topics Simplified. We take complex legal concepts and break them down in a way that's easy to understand and hopefully a little bit fun.
Definitely.
Today we're going to be doing a deep dive into something called the Permanent Lok Adalat. It's a unique feature of the Indian legal system.
It is. It's a really fascinating way to think about resolving disputes. And it offers like a,
Yeah.
a faster and less formal route to resolving certain types of disputes.
Okay, so like cutting through all the red tape.
Exactly.
Yeah. So let's start with the basics. What exactly are Lok Adalats in the broader sense?
So Lok Adalat, that means people's court.
Right.
And it's basically an alternative dispute resolution mechanism. It's been a part of the Indian legal system for quite some time, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And it's rooted in these Gandhian principles of finding amicable solutions outside of the traditional court system.
So more about like mediation and coming to an agreement.
Exactly. And I think what's really interesting is that the first Lok Adalat camp was actually held way back in 1982 in Gujarat. And it was so successful that it kind of gained momentum. And eventually in 1987, the Legal Services Authorities Act gave Lok Adalats this statutory status.
So they're like officially recognized.
Exactly.
Wow. So we have these Lok Adalats, which sound like a great idea, but then there's also this other thing called a Permanent Lok Adalat.
Right.
What's the difference?
So there are actually two main types of Lok Adalats. You have the regular Lok Adalats, which happen periodically. And then you have these permanent Lok Adalats, which is what we're going to be talking about today.
Okay.
The PLAs.
The PLAs.
And they were established under Section 22B of the Legal Services Authorities Act in 1987.
Okay.
And they're kind of like, they're permanent bodies.
Right.
And they're a compulsory pre-litigation mechanism for certain kinds of disputes.
Okay, so before things even go to court.
Exactly.
Interesting. So who makes up a Permanent Lok Adalat?
So the Permanent Lok Adalat, it's comprised of a chairman who is either a current or a former district judge.
Okay.
And then two other members. And these members typically have expertise in things like public utility services, law, social work, that sort of thing.
So people who have some real-world experience in those areas.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got the structure down, but what exactly do these PLAs have the power to do?
Well, their jurisdiction is pretty specific. They handle disputes that are related to public utility services.
Okay, so what kinds of things would that include?
So that could be anything from transport, like air road, water, postal services, telegraph, telephone, power, water, sanitation, public health, even insurance.
So basically all the essential services we rely on.
Exactly.
Yeah. But would they handle any dispute related to those services?
That's a great question. So there are limitations. Initially, PLAs could only handle disputes up to 10 lakh rupees.
Okay.
But as things have evolved and the value of disputes have increased, that limit has actually been revised.
Oh, interesting. So what's the limit now?
It's now a whopping 1 crore rupees.
Wow. Okay. That's quite a difference.
Yeah, it is. So it really shows how the system has kind of adapted over time.
To keep up with the times.
Exactly.
Okay. So let's say I have a dispute with my telecom provider over an unfair bill.
Yeah.
And it falls under that 1 crore limit. How would I actually go about approaching a PLA?
So PLAs actually act as like this pre-litigation forum.
Right.
So the aim is to settle these disputes before they even reach the courts.
Okay.
Yeah. So you would file an application with the PLA, and they actually have the power to summon witnesses, examine documents, receive evidence, just like a regular court would.
So it's not just an informal chat.
Right. They have real authority.
Right.
Yeah.
But it still sounds a lot less intimidating than a courtroom.
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. So how is that different from a regular Lok Adalat?
So a key difference is that regular Lok Adalats, they primarily focus on facilitating settlements, but PLAs actually have adjudicatory powers.
So they can actually make a decision.
Exactly. If the parties involved in the dispute can't reach an agreement through mediation, the PLA can step in and issue a binding decision. Yeah.
And does that hold the same weight as a regular court decision?
It does. It carries the same legal weight as a decree from a civil court.
Wow. Okay. So no appealing?
That's right. There's no provision for appeal, which I know can sound a little bit scary.
Okay.
But it's meant to ensure that there's swift implementation of the decision and to avoid any further delays.
So it's all about speed and efficiency.
Yeah, exactly.
But what if the PLA makes a mistake?
Well, that's where the composition of the PLA is really important. Remember, the chairman is a current or former district judge,
Right.
and the other two members have expertise in these relevant areas.
Yeah.
So it's meant to ensure that there's,
Yeah. A balance of legal knowledge and practical experience.
okay, that makes sense. Now, I think a real-world example would be helpful. Do we have a case that kind of showcases the role and the power of a PLA? We do. There's actually this fascinating case involving MS IFCO Tokyo General Insurance that not only demonstrates how PLAs work, but it also highlights this issue of unfair and unreasonable clauses in contracts.
Okay.
I'm listening. So in this case, there was a man who had a pre-existing health condition, and he was denied an insurance claim.
Okay.
And the insurance company cited an exclusion clause in his policy, basically saying that they wouldn't cover pre-existing conditions.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But this man had been paying his premiums for years, and the condition existed before he even signed up for the policy.
This doesn't seem very fair.
Yeah. So he decided to approach the Permanent Lok Adalat for a resolution.
He felt like he'd been wronged.
He did. And what's amazing is that the PLA actually ruled in his favor.
Really?
They determined that the exclusion clause was unfair and unreasonable.
Wow. So they overrode what was in the contract.
In a sense, yes. They said that in this particular context, that clause was not enforceable.
Oh.
The insurance company wasn't happy with that decision, so they appealed to the Punjab Haryana High Court. Okay.
But the High Court also sided with the man, upholding the PLA's decision.
So both the PLA and the High Court agreed that the clause was unfair.
Exactly.
Wow. That's a really interesting case. It really shows how PLAs can actually protect consumers.
Yeah. It's a reminder that we need to pay attention to those fine print details and not be afraid to question things that seem unfair.
Absolutely. So we've talked about what PLAs are, how they're structured, and even seen a real-life example. But what are some of the broader advantages of using this system? Why would someone choose a PLA over a traditional court?
Well, I think one of the biggest advantages is that PLAs focus on pre-litigation.
Okay.
So they aim to prevent disputes from even becoming court cases.
So it's about resolving things early on.
Exactly. Which can save a lot of time, money, and stress.
For everyone involved.
Exactly.
Okay.
And because of that focus on early resolution, PLAs tend to be much more cost-effective.
I imagine there aren't all those court fees.
Right. There are no court fees, which
Uh-huh.
makes them much more accessible to people.
Okay. That makes sense. Yeah. And beyond the cost factor, PLAs are also designed to be more flexible and informal.
So less rigid than a traditional court.
Exactly.
Okay.
They're not bound by the same procedural rules, which allows for a more collaborative atmosphere.
Or like a conversation.
Exactly. And that can often lead to quicker resolutions.
So more efficient.
Much more efficient.
And probably takes a load off of the regular courts, too.
Absolutely. By handling these specific types of disputes, PLAs help to alleviate the burden on the already overburdened court system.
So it's a win-win situation.
It really is.
Okay. Now, we talked earlier about how PLA decisions are final and binding, which definitely contributes to that efficiency. But are there any downsides to this system? Is it all smooth sailing?
Well, while PLAs have a lot to offer, it's important to acknowledge that they're not a perfect solution. They do have some limitations.
Okay. Like what?
Well, one of the most obvious limitations is their jurisdiction.
Right. They only deal with those public utility services.
Exactly.
And up to that 1 crore limit.
Right. So if your dispute falls outside of those parameters, you'll need to explore other avenues for resolution.
Makes sense. So it's good to know what they can and can't handle.
Exactly. Another challenge is awareness. A lot of people simply don't know about PLAs and the benefit if they offer.
So they might not even consider it as an option.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then there's also the fact that PLAs rely on a willingness to settle.
Okay.
They work best when both parties are open to compromise.
So it's not a magic bullet.
Right. It requires that both sides want to find a solution.
Oh.
And finally, there can sometimes be issues with infrastructure.
Like what?
Things like a lack of trained personnel
Mm.
or inadequate facilities.
So those logistical challenges can sometimes hinder the process.
Yeah. But it's important to remember that the PLA system is constantly evolving,
Okay.
and there are ongoing efforts to address these challenges.
So room for improvement.
Always.
Great. Now that we've covered both the pros and the cons, are there any suggestions for how this system could be further strengthened or improved?
I think there are a lot of interesting ideas out there.
Like what?
Well, one common suggestion is to expand the jurisdiction of PLAs.
So that they could handle more types of disputes.
Exactly.
Okay.
And maybe even raise that monetary limit further.
So that they could be relevant to even more people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Another crucial suggestion is to improve awareness, letting people know about PLAs, how they work, and how they can access them.
Right. So spreading the word.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then, of course, addressing those infrastructural challenges, providing more training, better facilities, more resources.
So giving them the support they need.
Exactly.
And finally, what about some kind of system to monitor and evaluate their performance?
That's a great point. Having regular assessments to make sure they're functioning fairly, efficiently, and in accordance with legal standards.
So checks and balances. Okay. Well, this has been a really fascinating and informative look at Permanent Lok Adalats. We've covered their history, their structure, their benefits, their challenges, and even their potential for future development.
Yeah, it's been a great discussion.
Now, before we wrap up this first part of our deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. We've talked about expanding the PLA model to include more types of disputes. Do you think that could be a viable solution for tackling some of the broader challenges facing the Indian justice system?
That's a really important question.
And what impact could such an expansion have on access to justice for everyone in India?
I think it's a discussion worth having.
Absolutely. We'd love to hear your thoughts and perspectives on this, so feel free to share them with us on our social media platforms.
We're always eager to hear from our listeners,
We'll be back with part 2 of our deep dive into Permanent Lok Adalats.
where we'll explore those questions in more detail.
So stay tuned.
Expanding the PLA model to cover more types of disputes, that could really change things. For access to justice in India.
It could.
Way.
Well, think about it. Right now, the legal system, it's very complicated,
Yeah.
especially for people who aren't familiar with all the legal processes
Right.
and PLAs. With their focus on simplicity and being easy to understand, they could help bridge that gap.
I see. So it would be less intimidating for the average person.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I think what that could do is it could encourage people to actually try to resolve their disputes
Instead of just giving up.
instead of just giving up or,
Right.
resorting to other methods outside of the legal framework.
Right. Which might not be the best way to go.
Exactly.
Okay.
So it could lead to faster resolutions, lower legal costs, and just a more amicable approach to solving these conflicts.
That makes sense. But I imagine there would be some challenges as well.
Oh, definitely.
Not every dispute can be resolved through these informal means, right?
You're absolutely right. It's not as simple as just expanding the scope.
Right.
We have to think about it carefully.
Because some disputes, they really need those formal procedures and stricter rules of evidence.
So like you would find in a traditional court.
Exactly. So,
Right.
for example, complex commercial disputes or criminal cases with serious consequences.
Right.
Those probably need that more structured legal framework.
Because the stakes are higher?
The stakes are higher and the issues are more complicated.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So, I think we need to carefully assess which types of cases would be a good fit for the PLA framework.
To make sure it's fair for everyone.
Exactly. We want to make sure that everyone involved gets a fair chance.
Okay. Now, even if we can figure out which cases are appropriate, expanding the PLA system would still require a lot of resources, right?
Absolutely. We would need more funding, more training for the people working within the PLAs, and definitely improvements to the infrastructure.
This is a big undertaking.
It is. But I think if it leads to greater access to justice, it would be worth it.
Yeah, I agree. It's an exciting possibility.
It is.
So what's the bottom line here?
I think the bottom line is we need to be strategic, we need to be thoughtful, and we need to make sure that those core values of accessibility, efficiency, and fairness stay at the heart of the PLA system.
Well said. We've really delved deep into Permanent Lok Adalats today,
We have.
exploring their potential, not only as they exist now, but also as a possible model for the future of the Indian legal system.
It's been a great discussion.
And throughout this exploration, we've really tried to keep the focus on the human element,
Right.
how PLAs can make the legal system more approachable,
Less intimidating.
less intimidating.
For the average person.
Exactly.
Because the law should be something that empowers people.
Not something that scares them away.
Exactly.
So I want to go back to that question we posed earlier. Could expanding the jurisdiction of PLAs be a viable solution for tackling some of the bigger challenges facing the Indian justice system?
It's a complex question,
It is.
but it's one that we need to consider.
Absolutely. And we want to hear from you, our listeners.
Yes.
What are your thoughts?
Do you think this could be a positive step Or are there potential drawbacks that worry you?
Share your insights with us on social media.
We're always interested in hearing your perspectives.
This has been a really thought-provoking deep dive.
It has.
We've explored the complexities of permanent Lok Adalats,
Their history.
their potential for the future.
Their structure.
And it's all about making the legal system work better for everyone.
Exactly.
We'll continue this exploration in part 3, where we'll delve into some more practical insights and takeaways.
Stay tuned.
And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into permanent Lok Adalats.
You know, it's really been fascinating exploring this really unique part of the Indian legal system.
We've talked about the history, the structure, the benefits, the challenges, and even how this model might change in the future.
Yeah. And hopefully our listeners are walking away with a better understanding of this really valuable resource.
I hope so. Now, before we wrap things up completely, I want to bring it back to you, the listener. Let's talk about some key takeaways, things that you can actually apply in your own life.
Sounds good.
So here's the bottom line. If you're facing a dispute that's related to a public utility service, and the amount of money involved falls under the PLA's jurisdiction, think about giving it a shot.
Yeah. It could save you so much hassle compared to a regular court case.
Exactly.
Yeah.
PLAs are meant to be easy to use, efficient, and less intimidating.
Absolutely.
So don't be afraid to approach them. If you think a public utility provider has treated you unfairly,
Right.
even if you're not currently in a dispute, just knowing about PLAs can be helpful.
It can. It's all about being informed about your rights and your options.
Exactly.
And the more you know, the better you can protect yourself.
Now, we also talked about possibly expanding the PLA model to include more types of disputes.
Right.
And while that comes with challenges,
Yeah.
it could make the legal system more accessible and efficient for everyone.
It's definitely an ongoing conversation. And it's important for everyone to share their thoughts on how we can make the legal system more just and equitable for everyone in India.
Well said. Well, we've reached the end of our deep dive into permanent Lok Adalats.
It's been a really interesting journey.
It has.
I always enjoy these deep dives.
And we hope that you found it insightful and maybe even a little bit empowering.
Knowledge is power.
It is. And remember, LexTalks Legal Topics Simplified is all about making the law a little bit less mysterious.
And a little bit more accessible.
Exactly.
Well, keep those legal minds curious and keep exploring.
Thank you for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe to LexTalks for more deep dives into the Indian legal landscape. Until next time, stay curious.